We do not write in order to be understood. We write in order to understand. Cecil Day Lewis. It's time for science, and it's time to talk about summer science at home and nature journaling. We are delighted to have as our first guest John Muir Laws, a principal innovator in the global nature journaling movement. John Muir Laws is an award-winning naturalist, artist, scientist, educator, and author and illustrator of several books, and the co-author of How to Teach Nature Journaling. John and I talk about what exactly nature journaling is, why you don't need to be an artist to nature journal, and what nature journaling offers all of us and why it's important. Then it's time to talk to Erica Beck Spencer. Erica is a curriculum specialist with the Full Option Science System Project, FOSS, and spearheaded the Taking FOSS Outdoors initiative. We discuss my interview with John Muir Laws, how nature journaling might be used with students over the summer, nature journaling's value for students and for teachers, and Erica's experiences with nature journaling both as an educator and in her personal life. It's time for science, and it is time to talk about summer science at home. Kids are off for the summer, but that doesn't mean science stops. And a great way to keep kids excited about the world around them is through nature journaling. We're very honored and excited to talk with the principal innovator in the global nature journaling movement, John Muir Laws. John is an award-winning naturalist, artist, scientist, educator, and the author and illustrator of several books, including The Laws Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling, The Laws Guide to Drawing Birds, and The Laws Guide to the Sierra Nevada. He is also the co-author of How to Teach Nature Journaling and is the co-founder and president of the Wild Wonder Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to encouraging nature connection and conservation through attention, curiosity, art, science, and community. So John Muir Laws, welcome to our podcast.
Tom, it's a delight to be with you. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I'm very excited because I am an artist and an illustrator and a cartoonist myself, and I just thought that I've done some science textbooks and things in the past. I'm really excited to talk to you about this. But let's start off with the big topic question, which is, what exactly is nature journaling?
So nature journaling is journaling in nature, but you already knew that. So what is journaling? So journaling is when you get any form of a recording device, and what you're going to do is get all of your observations, your thoughts, your questions, anything that's going on between your ears, out of your head and onto a piece of paper or onto that recording device. And when you do that, it frees up all of this extra bandwidth in your brain to then notice other things and go more deeply into your experience. And in the moment, it helps you pay deeper attention. And in the long term, it profoundly changes your ability to remember the details of what you're doing. So the way that I do journaling is by keeping a notebook where I am drawing pictures and I'm writing words and descriptions and notes about what I see, and I'm also quantifying things. So I'm counting things, timing things, measuring things. So I've got those three languages kind of percolating along there. And then I take this tool, essentially the journal is our most profound thinking tool. Every scientist that you can think of kept a journal. Every artist that you follow kept a journal. Every musician who you enjoy, they keep a journal, because our ability is to hold things in our heads, it's not good enough to kind of do higher level thinking. Then what I do is I take this tool out into the natural world. And the natural world is infinitely complex and wonderful. And the more that I can pick any little part of something. I find a little beetle. I find a slug trail across a path. As I start to look at that, I'm going to discover mysteries and things that I didn't know, that I didn't understand. And I'll be able to use that journal as an investigation tool. You can apply this to anything, so it doesn't have to be, you're not necessarily in a park or something like that. You can do this in your garden. You can do this with the spider on the windowsill. You can do this with a piece of fruit from the grocery store. Anything that has complexity, and you will begin to discover that you find complexity everywhere once you start using this process.
That's fascinating. I love this. I think one of my first thoughts when you think about this is people think about the drawing, and some of them are just so beautiful and all that kind of stuff. But I like that you said pretty much any device, a recording device. We all walk around with our phones now. You could easily leave yourself a voice memo or do it on that. But do you think if somebody says, well, I'm not an artist, I don't know, how would you talk to them about that? Just being afraid of being an artist.
Yes. So that is probably the big piece that prevents people from picking up the journal and starting, is because they look at some people, they may be professional artists and they journal. And so then you think that, and those are the journals that get spread most widely, because people were attracted to the beauty on that page, and people are like, oh, that must be what nature journaling is. In order to journal, you need to be able to do that. But it's not about art. It's about the thinking. It's about the observations. And let me use an analogy. Let's think about writing. I am dyslexic. When I sit down to write, I can spell the same word 30 different ways and not be able to notice that I have, right? So if I were thinking to myself, contributes, how do I spell right? And I'm thinking, I don't know how to spell that word, so I don't write that word. I'm going to prevent my brain from recording information using words. And so what I want to do is, when I'm journaling, is I give myself permission to spell this any way that I want. As long as it works for me and it's recognizable for me, this is a tool for me and my brain. And so however that comes down on the paper, that's useful. And the same is true with drawings. It doesn't have to be a pretty picture, as long as it's a useful picture. Maybe it shows the distance between the tree and where the badger den was. Maybe it shows the general proportions of something, or there's part of a pattern that I've recorded there. By making drawings in the journal, independent of whether they're looking pretty or not, it will improve the way that I observe and change the way that I think. Because the part of my brain that is involved in pictures, I've got this visual cortex at the back of my brain. Part of my brain towards the front is perhaps more involved using language. And there's parts of our brains that in fMRIs light up sort of along the sides of your head. If you put your hands on your skull above your ears, there seems to be a lot of activity in there when people are doing math things. So when you are sort of shaking it up and sometimes writing and sometimes making a sketch, sometimes making a map, making a diagram, sometimes counting things, and sometimes making a measurement, this is going to get my brain just jiggling around up there and doing something interesting. And that's useful. So if you are more comfortable writing, what I recommend that people do is think of your journal as something that could be mostly writing. If that's your comfort zone, start there. But you're going to find if you start to add a few sketches and drawings and measurements or timing things in with that, when you're doing that, you'll be like, oh, this is actually a little bit different. That's interesting. If your comfort zone is drawing pictures, start with that. But then get yourself to make little written notes and annotations on things, and make a little note and draw a little line over to that part of the drawing. And you're like, wow, that's actually a different way of thinking. And the more of that which we can intentionally kind of juggle together, the more sort of the bigger a canvas our neurons have to play on.
I love that, because I've taught kids drawing a lot, and they always have this image of, I think they think of the drawing as a finished thing immediately. Like they draw Mickey Mouse and it's got to be exactly like Mickey Mouse. I said, no, that's a sketchbook. You go to your drawing circles and then you do this. So it's great to reinforce that, I think, to kids especially, that it's not going to be perfect. That's not the point. And so, right. Yeah, that's really cool. It's like, so...
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Tom, because you hit the nail on the head. What you just pointed out there is that it is not the product, it's the process. That's what we're going for. Yeah. We want to be embedded in that process. And if thinking to ourselves that I've got to have a beautiful product stops me from even trying or doing anything, I'm not going to get anywhere. So you're spot on with that.
I think it's a big issue in the art world in general, especially with social media, because both inspiring and depressing to go through Instagram or other places, and you see this great art, and you're like, that's great. And eventually you start going, I'm not that good. I'm not that good either. And so I think kids are seeing that too much. It's sort of like, yes, the art is inspiring, but don't let it stop you, So it's that interesting walking that line. So this is a great idea for getting them to do that, I think.
Yeah, and this is not just for kids. This is also applies to us as adults.
Oh, yeah.
What was the last time you saw a grown-up take up a new activity that they're not already good at?
Right.
So people in retirement will take that risk, but especially adults mid-career, we identify ourselves by our competencies, and we're not willing to try something that we're not able to sort of trumpet as like, look at my skill set, I am enormous. Right? And so the way we kind of get around that is if we look at something and I go like, and there's a really skillfully done drawing, and I say to myself like, oh, that's just so good. I mean, how interesting that we are looking at something that's beautiful, and we just kind of like, oh, that's so good. Because what's going on is I'm comparing my ability to do that with theirs. I'm noticing that they're there, I'm here. That's different, and so it's depressing. Yeah, what that is if we hold to an idea that our brain is fixed, right, then when we see some skill performed at a level beyond our current capacity, we go like, I can't do that, they can, they're better than me, that's a bummer, because I'm stuck here. Right. On the other hand, if we are aware of our ability to change the way that our brain works by work and repetition and effort and practice and doing it again, rinse and repeat, try it again, then we look at that and it's inspiring, because we go like, oh, like, how are you doing that? What's going on with that? Like, oh, I wonder, like, what did you do that part before that part? Oh, you went directly in with that? That's interesting. I've never tried that before. And so we're dissecting it from a functional sort of standpoint, so we can scavenge it for ideas for our own work. So the growth mindset that I'm not stuck where I am, but I can change my brain through my work is essential for helping human beings attempt things, try new things, and be willing to have the vulnerability to start so that we can grow. But if we never start, we can't grow.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a great lesson, especially for kids. But again, as an adult, as somebody who's been doing this for 30 years, I have to do that too. I have to remind myself, oh yeah, okay, I'm obviously being overwhelmed. I'm going to put that down for a little while and go draw. I'll be back over here. So I mean, I think getting back to specifically the nature journaling, how does this help students observe the natural world? It's because, I mean, I think you touched on that, but I mean, very specifically for a teacher teaching kids, what are the kids getting out of observing nature this intensely?
Oh. So, first of all, the reason that nature is so much fun in this is because there's an infinite level of complexity. Right? If you look at something created by a human being, eventually you kind of get to the end of what that human being was thinking, right? And there you have it. Now, anything you're looking at in the natural world there's infinite complexity, and you can keep sort of zooming in. And there's structure, and there's structure, and there's structure there. With human stuff, eventually, like, you start zooming in on a little picture, and we finally get to the point where it's just pixels. But on nature, it's infinite. And so when we are observing, we're training ourselves how to see. We're training ourselves, how do I pay attention? How do I notice what is sitting right in front of my face? And we have the subjective experience that if I can see, I know how to observe. But our brains are very, very efficient, but also kind of lazy wad of electric meat. Your brain can handle about 7 different concepts at a time, plus or minus 2. And when you start to kind of get beyond that, when the complexity grows beyond that, then our brain gets full. It reminds me of that old Far Side cartoon, the kid in class raising the hand and say, could I please be excused? My brain is full. Right? My brain is full. So but your brain fills up. It's what's called your cognitive load. You want the complexity of the world. You can't handle the complexity of the world, but your piece of paper can. And the piece of paper can handle all sorts of things side by side. So you observe something, you put it down on paper. You observe something, you put it down on paper. Very quickly, the piece of paper starts handling more complexity than you can manage inside your head. But then you can look down at that piece of paper and you can notice what you noticed. You can see the sorts of questions that you're asking. You can then draw lines on the page, start connecting things in a way that's much more sophisticated and nuanced than you can do inside your electric meat. So as an essential thinking tool and observation tool, it's essential. So if you're a teacher, what you're doing is you're teaching science and engineering practices. This is how all of science is based on observation. How do we get better at observation? Well, think of every scientist that you can name. They kept a notebook. You want your kids to think like Da Vinci? Start acting like Da Vinci and keep a notebook.
And also I find it's the kind of thing where you're just going to forget something that may have happened only an hour ago. But if you've jotted it down, you go, oh yeah, that was that thing. And it keeps the connections coming. I'm also, by the way, going to work the term electric meat for my brain into my vocabulary. So thank you very much.
But just to tie into what you said there, with memory, the work of putting the thing down on paper, you're having to observe something, pick it out as a specific thing that I'm recording. You put that down on paper. That work, that effort, even if you were to lose the notebook, helps you remember that experience. Many people who have been traveling, they go, bopping about in some ancient city, and they're thinking like, wow, this is incredible. What a vivid experience. I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life. And then somewhere along that trip, they come across a pile of a ruined building, and they sit down and they pull out a notebook, and they sit there for a half an hour and they make a sketch of it. And then at the end of that day, they sit down, and what happened today? Well, there was this pile of rubble, right? That moment that you sketched, be it an abbey on the hill, a building that you're looking at, a statue, a flower, that thing that you put in your notebook is the thing you will remember. Our brains, with that 7 plus or minus 2, the minute another thing shows up, squirrel, something just got bumped out.
Exactly. I also like that because not only as an artist, but I think if you were writing this down, when you look at something, you begin to think about, like as you say, its structure. If it was a man-made thing, you have to think about, well, where did they put this wall? So if you're drawing an abbey, you have to start thinking about the people who built it. And you have to start thinking about, oh, that's why this window does this. And so even if you're writing that down or drawing, especially for drawing, because I've done it all my life, but I begin to really understand more about, like, that's why I think artists go to museums and copy sculptures, because you begin to think like the sculptor. What was that sculptor doing at this moment? Right. So I love that connection, and obviously with nature, and to bring that around, because one of the things I think when people think about this is they think of, you're in nature, you're on a mountain and there's a beautiful vista, but you could do this in your backyard as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that for teachers to emphasize that, as you said earlier, it's a spider on your window. I just talk a little bit more about doing this anywhere.
So let's see, I was just in Canada, and what did I geek out on? While I was there, I studied a fire hydrant. I looked at this fire hydrant, and it became the most fascinating. The more I looked at it, the more interesting it became. And it was this beautiful, interesting... I'd studied the floor plan of part of a library, looking at their kind of quiet room and how it was designed and what my thoughts were about sort of the thinking that went into that. I was making diagrams in my notebook. So as I was drawing it, I'm kind of capturing some shapes and things that might be hard to describe in words. And then I'm using words to describe things that would be hard to describe with pictures. Like they had all these little stoppers on the bottoms of the chairs that squeaked. So every time somebody moved, the whole room would go, ah! And then there was no sound cushioning anywhere. It was a beautiful room. But it was one of the noisiest rooms in the library, this room where everybody was supposed to be quiet. But by making a diagram of it, it just sort of, all these pieces came together. I then went outside and I was looking at dandelions in a park. I whatever it is that kind of raises an eyebrow, like, that's interesting. Why is that way? I can go more deeply into that and discover, again, these levels of complexity and nuance there. Why is the rust forming in those places on that hydrant, in those places? What's going on with that? And how many layers of paint here? Like, what's the history of this? It was, when you start, a lot of people think nature journaling, that must be what you do when you go to a national park. Nope. Nature journaling is what you do the moment you open your eyes, because what is around us, everything around us is nature. Right. And I do include the human environment in this. I do include our built environment. And kind of trying to get into somebody else's head is really, really fun and interesting. And when you think you figured it out, you're probably wrong. Right?
Often the case, yeah.
Yep. We hardly know ourselves. Not to mention, not knowing the other.
One of our teachers who weighed in on this was talking about the value of this for teachers themselves, because there's a lot of teacher shortages and burnout, especially after the pandemic, using this sort of thing to maybe center yourself and kind of, revisit what you're passionate about. So what kind of advantages do you think that a teacher would get out of this for themselves?
Well, for any of us, the process focuses you and slows you down. We live in such a fast-paced world. One of the advantages of it, like, people say, like, why do that when you could just pull out your phone and click a picture of it? I could do that in a few seconds. Well, the reason is that you do that and it takes a few seconds. I sit there and I'm looking at a fire hydrant. I sat there by that fire hydrant for about an hour and a half staring at a fire hydrant. And it really, really slowed me down. And if you were to have hooked me up to monitors as I was sitting there, my heart rate would have slowed, my breathing would have slowed, my blood pressure would have gone down. I came into a flow state, which is one of these sort of states where you're totally focused. I was completely unaware that my leg folded up underneath me as I sat on the sidewalk had gone to sleep because I was so fascinated by what I was seeing in front of me. And so there are all these meditation practices that try to get us to be here and now. If you are paying attention to whatever is in front of you, you are here, and you're here right now. And so it's a very powerful tool for relaxation, for meditation, for grounding yourself, for calming yourself. It cuts out all the other chatter. In just a few days, I'm going to be flying to Kenya. And one of the things I'm going to be doing there is going around to a bunch of national parks with an organization that works on mental health for park rangers. And I'm going to be teaching park rangers throughout Kenya. We're working with 180 park rangers and teaching them how to do nature journaling as a tool for kind of grounding yourself, calming yourself, connecting with place, and as a healing practice. It's been used. Nature journaling has been used extensively for helping people deal with PTSD, for all sorts of stress. As you watch a classroom full of students, if they kind of get into the flow with this, all of a sudden there's this level of quiet and focus that happens in the room. They can feel it, and you will too. So it's for me, my own mental health, when I become stressed, when I become depressed, any of these sorts of things, my wife now knows me well enough to say, Jack, I think you might want to just pick up your journal and go for a walk. And she's, you better go out journaling, right? I'm sitting around just being grumpy, and like, you better go out journaling. And I go out journaling, and I find a fire hydrant or I find a dandelion, and I come back and I'm a different person. Yeah. Because of the changes that take place in my brain and my heart when I focus like that.
We sometimes talk about elementary teachers who may not necessarily be science trained, I think this would be a great thing for them to do on a regular basis throughout the school year, is have a journal day or 15 minutes. We're going to go out to the blacktop and look for things. I mean, that alone, I think, is a great way to get kids to focus and to learn. So I think that would be a wonderful, great way to start the year. You know, a good example for a teacher. This is a very easy way to get started with the kids. Here's your journal. Let's go out and walk in the park and see what we see. And
it's so true. And a great way of kind of scaffolding that is that some people think, well, I'm going to be bringing people outside into nature. I don't know how to identify all the plants. I don't know all the birds. Like how, I mean, I'm not an expert out there. And that's fine. You don't need to be. What you want to do is to go out and start observing and then ask questions. And so what we do is we try to get ourselves to, I'm looking at this and you start to kind of like, why is that like that? Why is the rust pattern forming over there? And what were they thinking in this design? Why is it this way? Is that to replace that? Oh, I see. Right. And so you'll come up with questions, your students will come up with questions. And as you do, we're writing these questions down into our journals as well. So we're capturing all our curiosity. We don't have to answer any of these questions. Right. We don't, but what the questions do is they increase our focus and our attention on what's going on. Some of them you'll be motivated to follow and to get answers to. Sometimes you can do research and answer some of those questions, and sometimes the answers come by just making more observations and more observations.
I think we emphasize that a lot with this, is that to encourage kids not just to give them the answers, not that science isn't just here's A, B, C, we're done. You know, it's having them ask those questions and to be honest about, I don't know, let's figure it out. And I think this is a perfect example of that. So
is science a noun or a verb? Right? Is it something that you do? And if you're doing it, what does that look like? As opposed to a bunch of stuff that you now have to memorize. But think of science as a process of thinking, a process of observing and engaging with the world, and finding little mysteries, and then looking for evidence to give us clues towards what is going on there functionally.
You touched on this a little bit. I wanted to wrap up with sort of you've inspired obviously so many people, so many educators. You talk to people all over. You've written these books about these powerful experiences with nature. But how about you? What is one of your favorite sort of moments as you've been journaling, a thing you learned or observed in your time doing this out there in nature? What's one of your favorite things?
There's sort of a general phenomenon that happens to me again and again, where I go out and there are things that I think I know. And I get out and I start looking more carefully at the world. And I realized that it is so much more nuanced and interesting than I possibly imagined. Case in point are fire hydrants in Calgary, right? There are there's stories here. There's something really interesting going on. And my normal way of just sort of bouncing through the world, I'm going at such a pace that the mysteries don't have time to sink in. But if I can get myself to slow down, there are mysteries everywhere. And in spite of how much I have studied the sciences myself, it just reinforces again and again and again that there is this world is so much more infinitely complex and wonderful than I had possibly ever had imagined. And I discover that again and again and again. I love it when I find things that I think I know what's going on with them, and then I start to observe things that are in discord with my brain's current way of understanding that. And I find that when I don't have a journal in my hand, I'm going so fast that those little moments of the world's giving you like an opportunity to kind of disconfirm some of my misperceptions about the nature of reality. But if I'm going fast through the world, those little opportunities just bounce off the armor of my ego. But the journal slows me down to the speed of curiosity.
I think it's one of those things that as I age, I realize how little I know, which is, I think, one of the issues, without getting too into philosophy, but I think that is an issue in the world of people they think they know everything and then they will stay there in their little castle Whereas what you're saying is you're constantly learning something new. And when I have something I'm questioning, I'm excited by that. I think that's oh wait, new information has come to me. And I think some people fear that, but I think this kind of thing really embraces that, which I think is wonderful. So I wanted to point out people can go over to wildwonder.org. There's all sorts of resources there. Is there anything else you'd like to like if teachers want to get more information on this or download some resources?
Absolutely.
Where would you send them?
So there's a couple places that I'd send you. You mentioned wildwonder.org. It's a nonprofit organization which we have set up to help people do nature journaling, help people who are teachers get resources and material and strategies. Also, I have a website which is johnmuirlaws.com, and I have hundreds of hours of free resources, tutorials, drawing workshops, curiosity workshops, all those sorts of things. I've got a series that's made for teachers and classroom teachers. This a 40-part series that you could show one episode. They're short 15-minute episodes. You could show one of those to your class each week and go out and do a little journaling exercise with them. And by the end of a school year, you will have developed a really solid suite of journaling skills. So there's lots of resources there. So I would direct people first towards the Wild Wonder Foundation, and also I've got a website that also supports people in those endeavors.
That's awesome. Well, safe travels to Kenya. That's an amazing thing. Sounds like it's going to be a group who's going to be very receptive to this. They are out there in nature, but you're going to help them out even more so. That's awesome. And this has been great. John, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. It's been a delight and an honor to be here with you.
Joining me is Erica Beck Spencer from FOSS, the Full Option Science System. Erica is a curriculum specialist with FOSS and spearheaded the Taking FOSS Outdoors initiative. She's worked with thousands of formal and non-formal teachers about teaching outside. And she's served on the board of directors of the Maine Environmental Education Association, Ripple Effect, and will be stepping up as the board president for the Maine Math and Science Alliance. Prior to working for FOSS, she taught in urban schools in Cambridge, Boston, and Portland, Maine. And Erica, it's always great to have you here to give us the teacher spin on this subject. So welcome to the podcast.
Oh, Tom, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here again.
We had just talked to John Muir Laws for his podcast, and you had interviewed him in the past for this exact sort of thing. And I know that you admire his work very much. So how have you used nature journaling yourself with students?
I have been using them for many years with students. Often I would use them at the very beginning of the school year. I think nature journaling is a perfect thing to do when students are first coming into the classroom. You're establishing your outdoor learning routines. You're getting to know the kids. The kids are getting to know the schoolyard. They're getting to know you. You can start with observations of what's out in the schoolyard. It's a great way to bond both with the students, with the schoolyard, with each other, and to start building trust. You establish those outdoor routines and repeat them, all while doing stuff that is really foundational for what you're going to be doing in the science classroom throughout the whole school year.
Yeah, it would definitely feel to me like a great way for kids to ease into this whole thing and to really start to learn how to notice things and really get them to ask questions. That's fantastic. What is, John Muir Laws talked about the philosophy of the whole thing. What is your take on the general philosophy of nature journaling?
Thank you. That's a great question. He does such a nice job of defining it. It's simply using words, and these are actually his words. So using words, pictures, and numbers to collect and record your nature observations, questions, connections, and explanations in a notebook. And so we can go to the schoolyard and pick a special spot to sit, perhaps next to something blooming in the garden, next to a rock that might have things climbing on it, and the kids can choose something specific to observe. So they have the choice of what they want to look at and draw in their notebook. And it really doesn't matter what it is, but they start asking their own questions, making their own connections, and they start to think about why do they think what's going on is going on. It's a beautiful thing.
I think it's also a great thing in terms of, as I talk to him about, sometimes we view nature as like, giant national park with vistas, but it can literally be out the window on a rainy day. It doesn't even have to be outdoors. It could be what's going on inside the classroom. So it's a sort of a universal thing that teachers can do. I think that's very adaptable to their situation, whether they're in a country school or an urban school or anywhere.
Right? Why does that weed grow out of the crack in the sidewalk? Why do the worms come out during the rain? So many wonderful questions to ask.
We're already deep in the summer as this podcast comes out, so we were looking at this as a summer thing to keep kids interested in writing and reading and science. I mean, it covers all these things, art. It covers a little bit of everything. But how do you think it should be used over the summer? If you still can have, if you can still talk to the kids, what would you be suggesting they look for, things that they can do on their own?
Yeah, that's a great question. And ideally, the teacher has established this as a routine that students could do on their own. If I was still in the classroom, which I'm not, I might send kids home with a special little notebook that they could do this on their own, perhaps with a parent, maybe even looking out their own window or in their own yard or in a park near their house. They could do it on a family trip to a park near their home. They could also, I know certain programs that have done this with a summer enrichment program. I've actually done some training for teachers during some summer enrichment programs. I've worked with their teachers so that they could do it with students regularly. And that's a beautiful thing because during the school year, we're really constrained by time and what we need to teach. There's very little flexibility in what we get to choose, what we are able to do with students these days. But during the summer, there's a lot more freedom to do whatever we want. And so this kind of activity gets kids excited. They're excited to be outside. And it really incorporates things that we want kids doing all year long. It might be fun, and we're going to share some resources that we could send home or use during the school year that John Muir Laws shares on his website. But he has a quick start guide, and it's one piece of paper that you can fold and learn about his techniques that he shares. It's lovely. Thank you for creating it, Jack. And it could be something that a teacher mails home to students, and then some educators, I've known many who would do something like this, could mail it home and say, here's a challenge. Do this one time before you come back in to school, and then you'll share that on the first day of school. And then we're going to do it more together when you come back to school. Perhaps the teacher does it before she even gets to know who the kids are going to be in her classroom next year.
I think in the modern day, I mean, you can get a PDF anytime mailed to you. I mean, schools are so
That's
much more
true.
in contact with us as parents. It's great. And I
Yeah,
also, as looking at this as a parent, I mean, what a great thing to do with your kids over
yeah.
summer vacation, whether or not you go on vacation, especially if you go on vacation to someplace different, 10, 15, 20 minutes to get them to look around and really absorb what's going on, or just to get them out of the house. I mean, not to be old school, but, get off your phone, go outside for 10 minutes,
Oh,
I mean, go
exactly.
play, and this is a great way to do that.
And I know you're an artist, Tom, and I bet you would have loved doing this with your girls.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We talk about this in art and writing in general. Carrying a journal just for that, I think getting into that habit in general. I think Mr. Laws said that about if you're any musician or painter, anybody you've ever a writer, they all have journals. I mean, we have Da Vinci's journals. I mean, it's important, I think, to take 10, 15 minutes out of your day and just jot some stuff down. I think it's a great overall thing, but fantastic for science, of course. So you talked about using this with students in the classroom during the summer, but I'm wondering, have you done it? I mean, what kind of things do you do for your own edification with your own nature journaling?
I have used this myself I, almost every day, not daily. I wish I could say daily, but I journal daily and I do it outside. not every day, not in the winter. I live in Maine, so I don't sit outside and journal in the winter, but I
That would
do
be
journal.
dedication right there.
Yeah. There were times when I went outside daily. I did my everyday outside challenge, but I don't journal outside every day. But during the summer and early or late spring and early fall, I'm outside journaling. And even though I don't nature journal every day, whenever I see something I've never seen before, or just something that gets me excited and makes me wonder, I'll shift from journaling about what's going on in my world to what John Muir Laws talks about with nature journaling. And I shift into those processes of thinking about numbers and I wonder questions and this reminds me of and doing a quick sketch of what I see to better understand what I'm looking at. And so I don't do it as often as he does, probably, but every now and again I do. And when I do, I think to myself, why don't I do this more often? Because it's so relaxing. And when I do it, I understand what I'm looking at so much more deeply.
Hmm. And we touched on it with his interview. The other aspect of this for the teachers themselves about the mental break of something like this, and how difficult teaching is in general, but has become even more so in the last couple of years, and all the mental burnout and teachers just retiring early just because they can't. I mean, I really feel that this sort of a daily thing, it fits into that whole sort of like 5 minutes of meditation in the morning, but this is even better. I think it's a sort of a centering thing. Is that something you would suggest to teachers in terms of like just getting back to those basics and taking some time for yourself?
Absolutely. We are in this post pandemic time, and every time I read about the state of education and our schools, in whether it's statewide or on a national level, we read about how students are struggling academically, whether it's absenteeism or levels of anxiety. We read about how teachers there's a teacher shortage, how teachers are struggling, and school systems are shifting away from where we were pre-pandemic, where they were really focusing on science education and how to move things forward. And we've reverted back to a time of focusing primarily on literacy and basics of education because students have gone backwards and they really need to drive test scores. And so we really are worried about the state of our mental health of our students and our teachers. Doing this kind of work in a science notebook and in a nature journal will help students and teachers be calmer and more grounded and feel more connected to each other and to the natural world. It really does shift when you do it individually. It shifts your focus away from the things that stress you to a place of gratitude and a place of awe. Like, look at this amazing world that we live in and look at how interconnected everything is. It's amazing.
I think it's one of those things that brings you back to the basics, because every now and then you need to do that as an artist. You need to just turn off all the rest of their brain, a social media brain, and just focus on what inspires you as an artist or as a scientist. This bug on the ground, spend 10 minutes with that bug on the ground, everything else goes away, and I think
Yeah.
that that's super important. I mean, I hate to harp on it like an old man, but it's just that the pace of life is so fast. John Muir talked about that. The pace of life is so fast. We need to stop every now and then, and this kind of thing is wonderful because it just gives you that focus. Because like sitting and meditating is difficult, especially for me with my sort of ADD brain, but focusing on something does that for me. So I think it's very, very powerful stuff. It's very, very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about what kind of resources teachers have. We talked about his website. What kind of resources would you recommend to teachers to use?
I mentioned the quick start guide, and we will link to that in the show notes. It's on the Wild Wonder website, which is free, and there are so many wonderful resources on this website. What I love about the Quick Start Guide is it's such a simple explanation of what nature journaling is. So you're focusing on words, pictures, numbers, the using the sentence frame, I notice. What do you notice? What do you notice about that, as you said, Tom, that bug crawling on the ground? How many legs does it have? What does its head look like? How many joints do its legs have? What How about I wonder? What do you wonder about this? Where does it live? What's it eating? What's it doing on this ground? Like, why is it on the asphalt? It reminds me of. So all of these things are going to help you dig into understanding this thing you're looking at, this phenomena that you're trying to understand in a deeper way. In addition to that, he also has a bunch of videos that will help teachers better understand this process and how to work with students. So we'll link to those as well. And we also, on the FOSS side of things, we have a chapter that I worked on many years ago called the Taking FOSS Outdoors chapter. In the Taking FOSS Outdoors chapter, we have many strategies that we gleaned from work we did in the Boston Public School system, from the Boston Schoolyard Initiative, techniques that are tried and true that work with all students about behavior management outside. Teachers love these techniques. And if you're an educator and you feel a little nervous about taking students outside, these techniques will really help you. And we can link to that in the show notes. And it's a short little chapter. You can skim it. And I think it will help lots of educators feel more confident with teaching outside.
I really like that the approach is also for students. They go to school and it's always about memorize this, memorize that. Here's the concept. And this is like ask the questions. What do you wonder? I mean, kids love that. I mean, that immediately hits the kid where they live. Imagination. What's going on? Not telling them what it is, but letting them wonder about it. I think that's it really distills down the thing we talk about all the time on this podcast. I love that.
You really want, one of the science and engineering practices is asking questions. And if you, as I said at the beginning of this session, we want to start the school year with students asking their own questions and seeking their own answers. If you can start a school year with kids asking their own questions and knowing that even in kindergarten, you can have 5-year-olds asking their own questions, and they know that you're going to help them find their own answers. There's no better way to lay the foundation of an amazing school year. It's a beautiful thing.
That's great. That sums it up so beautifully. Let the kids have a little bit of ownership over this, and they'll buy in. It's amazing stuff. I want to wrap up with a question we asked John Muir Laws about this, but you yourself, did you have any particular moment, a sort of a magical or a memorable moment when you were just sitting there really observing and doing nature journaling?
I love that you asked this question. I knew this was coming up, and just recently, Tom knows that I am a sailor, and I was last weekend. I was out on a boat, and it was raining, and I was on this island, or on the boat near an island called Seguin Island in Maine. Beautiful island, remote island, and it has a lighthouse on it. And we never got off the boat because it was pretty wavy and chilly. Anyway, the point is, I saw on land a bird I had never seen before. And so I didn't want to take my eyes off of it, because I knew if I went down below to get my journal, I'd lose sight of it and I'd lose the opportunity. So I asked my friend to grab my journal for me. And I just started doing all of the things that I learned about nature journaling. And I had never seen this bird before. So I started writing down exactly what I saw, how big it was, the colors that I saw, how it was moving, what I wondered about it. It reminded me of how long its neck was, the color of its beak, the color of its feet, what its wings looked like, how it was walking. It was a beautiful moment. And then the bird flew and it was on a rock, like crazy ledge of a rock. I couldn't believe it was on this granite rock. And eventually it flew away and then it landed in the water. Once it was in the water, I was like, oh, I do think I know that bird. But when it was on land, I had never seen it before on land.
Hmm.
So eventually, after I couldn't see it anymore, I went down and found my bird guide and identified that it was a guillemot. And I did know what that bird was, but I had never seen it before on land. And it was a beautiful moment because I was reminded how powerful this process is. And it was a great prep for this podcast. And I was so grateful to have that moment. And
Well, we didn't tell you, but we hired that bird to do that, just to
yes,
sit
right.
there. We had to pay him in fish. It was crazy, but we got it done. So
And I never knew that guillemot had such beautiful red feet.
yeah, see, that's amazing. You were wondering about it because you hadn't seen that. I love that.
That's
Out of
right.
out of context moment that you then went in and wondered about. That like sums it all up. That's beautiful. Well, Erica, I really hope that teachers if they have any questions, they can write to us at the podcast or contact FOSS. We will have links to all of this stuff down in the show notes. Really feel this is a great resource for teachers, and I just want to thank you for being here.
Tom, thank you so much. Thank you for doing this great work. I love that you're helping people think about how to make more time for science.
It's Time for Science is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lippman and Tom Racine, and is sponsored by School Specialty and FOSS, the full option science system, at the Lawrence Hall of Science, UC Berkeley. Be sure to check out FOSS over on Facebook and Twitter.